Hi there, it's me the Jonin Monkey again, and welcome to Video Game Troubadour, where we review the best and the worst of video game storytelling. And welcome to another brand new year! 3 years after the world was supposed to end. Or 15, depending on which theory you subscribe to. Seriously though, 2014 was an interesting year, filled with drama over glitches, journalism, and social interaction. But we're not talking about any of these things, because that's not what this show is about, and I have no desire to discuss such things. Although the Pachirisu for the Pokemon Championship was awesome. I could also follow the example of every other video game show and talk about the major releases, but there was nothing groundbreaking last year, and if I talked about every single game I played over those 12 months, I would either be covering old ground or spoiling future reviews. So for today's video, I'm just going to reflect on a couple of things that happened to me over 2014, before taking a brief look at what's on the horizon for 2015. In the early months, I picked up a PlayStation 3 and spent most of the year trying to catch up with the critically acclaimed games I missed the first time round. One of these games, which I picked up from the bargain section on a whim, has now become one of my favourite RPGs of all time. Dragon Age Origins. Like many RPGs, it has both a great story and a likeable supporting cast, but it also has some of the best character creation and dialogue systems I've ever seen, making it a perfect vehicle for role-playing. I'll get into my full thoughts at a later date, but if you haven't picked this game up and you're a fan of RPGs, I cannot recommend this enough. Following that, I picked up the sequel Dragon Age 2, and whilst that game was enjoyable, I prefer Origins overall. This is mainly because Dragon Age 2 goes in a different direction, with a Mass Effect style dialogue wheel and a greater focus on combat and political tension rather than the characters and role-playing. That doesn't mean it's a bad game, it's just different from the first one, and whether that's a problem is going to depend on your personal preferences. That said, one of the biggest problems I had with the game is that the big, final narrative choice that the story had been building up to all of this time loses all of its impact when you realise that no matter what choice you make, the outcome is always the same. Did we really need to fight both bosses, guys? You couldn't have saved one for another playthrough? Really? Ah well, it's still a good game in its own right, so I'm going to continue following this series, and I'm looking forward to playing Dragon Age Inquisition once I have some free time. By stark contrast, I also tried to play the action game Asura's Wrath. 1 hour. That was all it took for me to lose interest in a narrative due to its bland storytelling and the fact that I could not connect with Asura as a character at all. The only time he stopped being angry McGrowley voice was the literal 60 seconds he interacted with his family before his wife was murdered and his daughter kidnapped in typical action movie fashion. I don't know if I'd call it the worst game I played in 2014, but it was certainly the least entertaining one. But as well as PlayStation 3 games and the big Nintendo releases, I finally managed to play 2 highly praised games from the independent scene. The first being a hit from 2013, Papers, Please. The concept is simple. You live in a paranoid dictatorship and you're working in passport control to support your wife and children. It sounds like a dull concept, but it's surprisingly compelling. You get caught up in the mechanics and try to do the best job you can, spotting the fakes, letting the right people through, etc. And then BAM! Something happens out of nowhere to remind you that you're actually dealing with people's lives. Every day, something happens to shake you out of the drudgery of your job and force you to stop and think. Sometimes it's simple things like handing out business cards to engineers. Sometimes it's desperate people making a plea to be let in so that they can escape their pursuers. And sometimes you even get offers to help a secret rebellion. And in every case, what happens next is your choice. It's a unique experience, and I'd fully recommend it to someone who wants to try something different. But if you're looking for something more traditional, I can also recommend Shovel Knight. This game has changed my opinion on retro throwbacks by showing me how they're supposed to be made. It's a love letter to the days of 8-bit gaming, but it doesn't make itself a slavish recreation of those days. It uses modern design elements to create a game that is unique and enjoyable in its own right. The story is a perfect example of this. Whereas most 8-bit platformers use their plots as simplistic excuses, Shovel Knight keeps that simplicity but adds a lot of personality and charm to both its world and the characters. particularly the lead character Shovel Knight. The introduction tells us Shovel Knight is a veteran warrior, but due to the loss of his partner, Shield Knight, he's been out of the action for a while and has to now try and save the world whilst adjusting to the fact that he's now just one half of a team. A great example of this is the dream sequence that happens after certain boss battles. It's a nice touch of gameplay and story mixed together to create an emotional scene that sums up everything you need to know about Shovel Knight's feelings through visuals alone. It's not exactly the deepest story, but you can't help but love it. Oh, and
5-second spoilers!
The final battle and this ending shot were both heartwarming and awesome. On the Nintendo side of things, the release of Hyrule Warriors has shown both Nintendo and the public that these pseudo crossovers can breathe fresh air into their franchises, and the announcements of Fire Emblem X Shin Megami Tensei and Puzzle & Dragons Mario Edition shows that this trend is likely to continue for a while. Personally, I'm all for it. I've already talked about Hyrule Warriors in Monkey Broadcast, but I will say once again that it is a fun game and there are many elements I'd like to see in the main series. Mainly the other characters being more involved instead of relying on Link to do every damn thing. Speaking of which, this shot from the ending where Link and Zelda work together to push the Master Sword back into the stone is a great image in itself, and it leads me to something I've noticed about Nintendo as of late. With the inclusion of Peach in Super Mario 3D World and the news that Toadette will also be a playable character in Captain Toad's Treasure Trackers, it seems like Nintendo are listening to their audience and are trying to be more inclusive by adding more playable women characters. Sure, it's only small steps at this point, but to quote Anki Seth from Ogre Battle, "In nature, change takes place over a long period of time. Slowly but surely, the same can be applied to our society. Radical change creates unwanted distortions, and it will only be a temporary solution." This was also the year I found a video format that I'm comfortable with and is manageable with my current schedule. One of the first videos I released under this format was Metal Gear Rising, and this is worth mentioning because even after completing that video, there are still some things I want to talk about. When reading through some of the comments on other forums, and actually before I continue with that story, two things I want to address. First, this text on screen is the long-winded reason why I reviewed this game first instead of Metal Gear Solid 2, which I still have plans to release later down the line. Second, I know Armstrong was a satire of American politics. My problem was that it was outdated and poorly executed satire. But yeah, back to the comments. One of them linked me to a video by Chris Wagger, who had his own analysis of the game, which you can check out here. His view was that the game was trying to tell players through Raiden to stop searching for a greater ideal and just enjoy the killing for what it is. This got me to think back on the game and look at interviews Kojima gave during its release, and honestly, I don't completely agree with that analysis. Whilst Kojima admits Platinum went in a different direction than he had planned, he was still the producer, and I doubt he would let them go ahead with a message that defies everything his games have been about. Overcomplicated themes and ideals are the heart and soul of Metal Gear after all. However, I do agree with Chris's idea that Raiden is a surrogate for the player. I think the message Platinum was trying to express is an examination of the excuses we make as players to justify our actions. Raiden believes he can do anything to the goons in front of him because they're terrorists, in the same way many players excuse their actions by saying they're aliens or they're evil. But he's given a sharp wake-up call through the interactions with the villains and realises that they are human, and sometimes they have no choice in the matter. In other words, the game is asking the player to stop trying to justify their actions and be more honest about what they're doing, rather than taking lives so casually. But like I said in the review, I have a problem with this theme. And whilst I don't believe in the idea of objective reviewing, I will be honest and admit when I have a personal reason for disagreeing with something. In this case, I get that they were going for the idea of Raiden being a tragic figure who is at odds with himself, wanting a peaceful life with his family, but at the same time a part of him really enjoys the battlefield and killing as a whole. My problem is the game portrays this psychotic side of him as the coolest thing in the world, and the way the villains reveal this tragic side of Raiden's character is by going, "You, a good person? You can't be. You kill people. You're just like us. Stop lying to yourself." In other words, it's cynicism masking itself as wisdom, which I find extremely annoying because it flies in the face of my own philosophy and beliefs. Look, I know the world is not perfect. I know I'm not perfect. But knowing that isn't going to stop me from trying to improve myself or from believing that we can learn from our mistakes and correct them. When I see a story that tells a man to stop trying to better himself and just admit he's a murderous psycho, I can't help but be pissed off. So, with all that off my chest, what are the plans for 2015? Well, first I have to get through some of the backlog, which includes Wild Arms 3, Tales of Graces, Crimson Shroud, Portal, Half-Life 2, The Banner Saga, Devil Survivor Overclocked, Earthbound, and Final Fantasy IX, along with SA2 and Tales of Symphonia for the talkthroughs. As for the new releases, I'll be finishing my run-through of Alpha Sapphire before picking up Dragon Age Inquisition, and after that, there are 2 games I'm looking forward to for the Wii U, Splatoon and Xenoblade Chronicles X. I'm sure Splatoon's story won't be anything special since it mostly seems to be a strange war between squids and octopi, but I'm still really excited by it, partially because the gameplay looks fun, but also because this is a new franchise from Nintendo made by their younger members, and as much as I love Nintendo's old guard, some new blood could be just what they need right now. As for Xenoblade Chronicles X, I loved the first game, so I was going to pick this one up anyway, but when I learned some more information about the core concept, I became even more excited. The story is based around a colony called New Los Angeles, just roll with it, crashing on an unknown planet and having to send out a team of specialists to explore the new land whilst trying to avoid the enemy they're running from. The reason this excites me is because the original Xenoblade Chronicles had a major focus on exploration, giving players experience points for finding new locations and landmarks. So giving a narrative reason for why the player should go off and explore is a brilliant move, and I'm eager to see what kind of locations this new world has. I mean, come on, the original had locations like this on the Wii's graphics engine, so I'd love to see what Monolith can do with an HD engine. And of course I'll be buying Zelda U when it comes out, and the big overworld Nintendo's been advertising for the past few years does look interesting. Whether or not it has anything to do with the plot has yet to be seen, but I'll keep my eyes on it either way. I'm also thinking about picking up Majora's Mask 3DS since the original is my favourite Zelda game, but it will all depend on whether or not they add new content to the game aside from motion controls. Speaking of the 3DS, thanks to the freelance jobs I did at the end of the year, I've got some extra cash to spend, so I'm thinking about picking up some new filming equipment, including the 3DS capture card so that I can expand the potential list of reviews even further, as well as going back to review some of my favourite portable narratives. And some of my least favourite ones as well, I suppose. And that's all for now. Thank you for following me throughout last year, and here's to many more reviews this year. I've been the Jonin Monkey, and until next time, cheerio and Happy New Year.